Hey, business builders. We're joined today by Rick MAHER from Turning Point, and Rick is going to talk to us about HR issues that commonly come up for business builders like all of you. And Rick's going to do a short talk, and will also at the end help us understand what it would be like to work with him and with an outsourced HR provider. That isn't the second best option for many of us. That would be the best option. So Rick, really good to have you today. And thanks for preparing this talk for the business builders.
Great. Thanks, Wayne. Thanks. Appreciate being here, and to everyone who's going to listen to this at some point, whether live or in recording. So my name is Rick MAHER. I'm the CEO and visionary of Turning Point Human Capital Management. And I started this business in 2010. And since that time, we've worked with over 2,000 businesses across the country in 48 states, all the lower contiguous United States, in 65 different industries. And I have a team of HR folks that work for me, and we execute using technology across the country. So all of our clients look exactly the same. They are first or second generation family types of businesses. They have between a handful and a couple of hundred employees, and doing something on the order of $1 million to $50 million in revenue. Now, we have outliers on either side, but the first or second generation family business is where we focus. And those businesses, and this is what we're going to talk about today and focus on, is they all hire us for the same 4 buckets of problems. And each of those businesses has a unique combination of these buckets, but they're all the same. And we're going to go through these in a little bit of detail as we get to the conversation. The first is compliance, right? So every day there's some new law, rule, or regulation that's essentially designed to put the owner in jail or make their lives miserable when necessary. The second bucket are employee issues. Everything from hiring properly, firing properly, why can't Susie get to work on time, and why is Johnny harassing everybody kind of stuff. The third bucket are the policies and procedures. So all the things that allow the business to scale and grow, but also set the rules for the employees. So think of things like the handbooks and the job descriptions and the performance management and those sorts of things. And then the fourth bucket is the strategic or the organizational development. How to get the right people in the right seats, right? We've all heard that term before, all working together cohesively to reach their individuals' goals, their division's goals, if there's a division, and then ultimately their company's goals. So not only do we help put those right people in right seats, but a lot of times those businesses don't have those things, which I know all the folks in the virtual campfire work on. So that's a great first start. So with that said, the first thing is, talking about compliance. This is one of the biggest and most costly issues that a business can run into. So many factors affect what a business must adhere to, and one small mistake can lead to huge repercussions, right? So think about for each business, your employee count, every state that you're in, every location, every residence, their industry, your business type. All of these things create different compliance issues. So just to give you an example, last year alone, the federal government came out with about 68 compliance issues that should be in your handbook and updated each year because they're making updates. Each state is coming out with about the same number of compliance issues. So if you have a company with 2 or 3 offices in a couple different states, with the federal, you're talking a massive amount of laws, rules, and regulations that no business owner can keep up with unless they truly have the right team, if you will, taking care of this stuff for them. So it's just the burden that's on the employers is massive. Every day they're walking through a minefield, and most of them don't even know. They don't forget that they know what mines are. They don't even know that they're in a minefield until one day they get this letter or this problem, and it can become a huge problem when not handled properly. The next kind of compliance thing that everyone needs to think about is training, right? So currently, there are 6 states with more in the hopper, and those 6 states are Connecticut, California, New York, Maine, Delaware, and Illinois, that just alone require harassment, sexual harassment prevention training, and each of them having their own set of requirements to meet their guidelines, right? And in most states, those have to be delivered every year to every single employee, every single contractor, and every single 1099 or part-time employee that may do any sort of work for you. And in this realm, many more states are discussing implementing requirements for harassment training. And there's even a chance that this could become a nationwide requirement. So think about your employees, think about what the states are doing and how they're throwing the book at people when the harassment training and those sorts of things are not done. The federal government and individual states are always updating their training requirements. So you need to know the laws, rules, and regulations in the places that you operate. And many states have implemented laws that require employees to take human trafficking and safety training, such as slips and falls and ergonomics and those sorts of things, OSHA types of requirements. So really understand from a training perspective what your company needs to do, or at least have a resource that understands not only what the requirements are, but then how to deliver them. The next issue that goes along with compliance is benefits, right? So for any of those companies out there that are offering any sort of benefits to their employee base, they know that it's one of the biggest expenses that the business can bear, aside from their employee cost in many issues. So the ACA, the American Care Act, or what we would know on the street as Obamacare, has requirements that each company must provide minimum essential coverage with minimum essential value that is affordable to most employees. And for most business owners, they're unaware of what the exact qualifications are that can put those companies at risk, right? So you want to make sure that you're looking at your employee benefits packages and understand how they fit into your compliance world. And earlier this year, the IRS announced that the ACA affordability threshold would decrease to 9.12% versus what was as 9.61%. So this is making the burden on the employer become even harder. So I want everyone to think about their employee benefits and make sure that, hey, it has to be more than just I am offering this, so therefore I'm a good employer. There are other things, let's call them trapdoors, that you need to be aware of in any part of in the compliance aspect. So I'm going to go into a couple of more compliance issues, but before I jump into some that I get a little, are there any questions so far that anyone has? And if you're not, it's okay, we can hold them to the end, on compliance or things that they would want to make sure that I address in my next 15 minutes of speaking. No? Okay, great. So the next, and I'm going to say perhaps the most quote unquote deadly compliance issue for business owners are wage and hour issues. Wage and hour is a tremendous trap set for employers. And why I say that is the Department of Labor, their biggest division is their wage and hour enforcement division, right? So this is an easy trap to get caught up in, and understanding where your business fits with wage and hour is a truly important. Someone needs to look at this stuff. And why the wage and hour division of the Department of Labor is so big is because that's where they collect fines and fees, right? And the Department of Labor's statistics, their own statistics, estimate that about 85% of all businesses in the United States run afoul of the wage and hour laws. and the fines can be tremendous, going back 6 years, and all the employees, ex-employees, it's craziness. And there's lots of different ways that they can go. So, so some other employee issues could arise from wage and hour and in the inconsistencies that businesses have, not because they're bad people, but just because they don't know, right? That they're in that minefield. The federal government and many states have issued minimum wage increases notices for this year. Many times we understand them, sometimes we don't. And it is so important for a company's HR department to monitor employee-related issues and updates to ensure that they are putting every effort forward for doing what they can to keep employee issues at a minimum, especially as it relates to wage and hour laws. So this is a classification issue. Is someone part-time? Are they full-time? Are they hourly or salaried, exempt, non-exempt? And many times, business owners don't know why they're making someone hourly or salary. They don't have a specific set of processes to determine that. And in many instances, they're classifying them incorrectly. And when that's done, if there's ever an employee issue, the potential for back fines, fees, taxes, expansion into other old employees, it's tremendous. 6, 7 years, all over employees. It's an amazing web that they have the ability to go after. And most small business owners, unfortunately, don't really know about these things until it's too late. So I encourage you to have someone look at your business from a wage and hour perspective, and as it relates to those employee issues. Many times, HR departments are the first to get overlooked, downsized, or not even in existence in a small business, right? We have the finance department, we have the sales and marketing team. Many instances, the first one cut or the last one implemented is the HR team, which quite frankly oversees your, most cases, the biggest expense of a business, their human capital. However, so in that, with many businesses, they don't realize that where there are employees, unfortunately, there can be issues, as we're identifying. These issues, as I mentioned a couple of times, can become extremely costly for employers. That is why employee issues are another very important bucket within HR that need to be handled with care. When it comes to employee issues, so many things can fall within this category, such as performance reviews, onboarding, training, disciplinary action, and more, right? Complaints against other employees, being treated unfairly. This happens all the time, and I'll give you some examples later on in this conversation. These employee issues, again, going back to most HR departments are either the smallest on the team, the first one's downsized, or the last ones to even be implemented. So it may not seem as obvious to employers that they have employee issues, but because of changing technology, the regulations that we discussed before, and that businesses themselves are changing to keep up with the times, companies must constantly update their employee protocols in order to maintain employee trust, employee safety, employee satisfaction. Why? Because those are the people that are talking to your clients. Those are the people that are generating your revenue. And those are the people that have the ability to carry your business forward. So under employee issues, one of the biggest things that small business owners unfortunately ignore is the concept of employee discipline, right? Many times, it's a situation starts like this. Someone comes into our office and says, hey, I just don't like what Johnny's doing, whatever that is, right? And the leader, the manager, the owner says, come on, I'll talk to Johnny, go back to work, I'll take care of it, right? And in that instance, they may have just created a liability for the company, and in some instances, a liability for themselves, because they don't have the proper policies, procedures, and protocols in place. So many times the owner acts in a way that they think is being fair and an honest broker of making it right. And that could end up becoming retaliation, right? And retaliation, regardless of the reason, if it's not done at the right time to it's improperly worded, or if it's done in the wrong setting, could be worse than the actual problem itself. And business owners make this mistake every single day because, as I mentioned, the HR departments are either the last ones implemented, the first ones downsized, or the smallest units on the team, dealing with the biggest creator of problems, which are the employees, right? So employee discipline and how that's handled, policies and procedures, is truly an important measure that businesses need to look at. Additionally, payroll. Most people think, hey, I hired ADP or Paychex or one of the payroll companies in town. They handle this for me, so I'm fine. The payroll and how it's run ties back into those wage and hour issues. And in most instances for small business owners, the payroll service is just producing what inputs those businesses give them. They're not necessarily looking at the policies and procedures that go into that payroll. And therefore, that can create a problem. And the business owner thinks, I hired a payroll company, they've got it. And the answer is they don't, right? In most cases. The analogy I would use is if you gave your accountant incorrect information and they filed your taxes using that incorrect information, they are just the conduit to the IRS, right? Payroll is just a conduit from your checking account to your employee's checking account. But there's so much that goes into it. Payroll for small business owners has to be looked at, reviewed, policies, procedures, etc. So then there's all these forms that need to go along, like I-9s and things like that need to be looked at, and that most business owners, again, are not doing them properly, and they're creating the minefield for themselves if they ever have a problem. The next, or the third bucket, are policies and procedures. So we talked about this in the agenda. Policies and procedures are so important when it comes to HR because they can keep companies uniform. Standardizing all the procedures can minimize unfavorable outcomes by setting clear expectations for your employees, clients, customers, and business. And if conducted with inefficient planning and training, inconsistent procedures can be the potential source of liability, right? So I'll talk about this in the next slide. Oftentimes I hear of those 2,000 businesses that we worked with in the beginning. They say, well, we've never had a handbook. We've never had a problem. Why do we even need one? We just handle it as it comes up. It creates inconsistency. It denigrates the culture that a business is trying to build. But more importantly, it puts all the power in an employee's hands should there be an action, right? So having consistent, properly identified policies and procedures that the HR team develops and administers across the company is really one of the best practices that anyone can have. And for small businesses, the first thing that they should have is a good, solid employee handbook, right? Don't write it yourselves. Don't pull it off the internet. Don't copy it from your brother or sister-in-law's business, because it's not going to help you. If it's not designed for your business specifically and your business is not using it as a living document, then it could create a problem. So HR's job is to work with leadership to build a great employee handbook that every employee understands what the rules are, right? They understand what they're being judged upon. They understand what will happen, how the company will react in every single situation with consistency, because inconsistency creates potential actions against the business. So every company should have an employee handbook. The next is the employee life cycle, right? Hiring and firing, right? As we all know, small business owners are too quick to hire, too slow to fire. There are a lot of problems that go along with this. And when done improperly, when done inconsistently, right? When done without, let's call it a handbook and job descriptions and performance reviews, and understanding that we're terminating Susie or Johnny for these reasons, well documented, well communicated, from the beginning of their life in your company to the end of their life in your company, not their life in your company. Those policies and procedures are the greatest protection your business can have. But more importantly, when you're bringing an employee on and you're trying to find right people, right seats, the best way to do that is to have those policies and procedures developed out so you makes it easier to recruit those people, retain those people, and create those A-plus players that every business is dying to have so that the owners can go play golf or go hunting or do the things that they want to do, right? So these kinds of policies and procedures are very important to every company. So, I want you to think about a termination, right? And think about that event. Think about how that feels, not only internally for us, no one really loves doing that. But think about that employee. Think about the macroeconomics of where we are today. The opportunities may not be as great for them to go out and get another job. So what are they going to do? They're going to lash out at the person they think has the most money. And though there are these lawyers out there that are using the personal injury model in employment law and creating actions against businesses where it doesn't cost that employee any money unless they win this some sort of settlement or suit. So you'll hear them you'll hear those employer lawyers on the radio. You'll hear them on TV now that you start to look for them and know that they're targeting every employee and saying, hey, have you been treated unfairly? We can probably get you money and you can keep your job. That's their pitch. So just kind of keep on. The next thing is your strategy. This is the final bucket. So we see this bucket as bringing all the above compliance, policies and procedures, and employee issues, bringing those all together to formulate a business plan that will keep your company at the lowest level of risk. For one person in a company to do this part-time and to know all the information above and keep track of every single new law and policy update and know how to plan for that is nearly an impossible task. So what you want to do from an HR perspective is you want to assess your risk, right? Get a score 0 to 100. What level of risk are you at? What areas of risk do I have this out? And when you understand that, then you can start to build a plan. How do we staff for that? Do we hire a person? Do we outsource it? Do we ignore it? Whatever it might be. But understand from a high level the HR risk that your company may face as the first step in the process. So, it's important to have this good, solid HR plan, just like you have a budget, just like you have a business plan, an exit plan, a marketing plan, a sales plan. It's a great idea to have an HR plan, right? So that you can put it into your strategic overview and fix the things that are critical and plan for the things that are, little less critical or nice to haves to protect your business, right? So having a good company plan is the first place to start. So in conclusion, I just wanted to kind of touch on these high level things, right? Compliance is out of control and it's getting worse. They're not taking away laws, rules, and regulations. They're making them more onerous, right? And they're never making them in the employer's favor. They're always in the employee's favor, right? So that's one. Two, employee issues. Employee issues, even though they may seem day-to-day or minuscule, these are the things that can jump up and bite you. And what I always say as employers, we know what we know. We know what we don't know. But what we don't know that we don't know is what destroys our business. And for a lot of businesses, this is a don't know that what we don't know. The third are your policies and procedures. Consistency in your HR plans doesn't have to take that much effort, but the overall value to your business, to your employees, to your being able to sleep at night is truly important. And then the fourth, when those three things are combined, it gives us the ability to get from an organizational development standpoint or strategy, get the right people in the right seats, all rowing in the same direction at the same time. So with that, one of the things that I advise every small business owner to do is to get an HR risk assessment. An HR risk assessment that gives them a report and reports on these critical 5 or 6 areas, gives them an actual score gives them a high level, okay, where are my risks? And it allows them to begin to put that plan, that HR risk review into their more strategic business plans. And so with that, I'll open it up if there's any questions, if there's any concerns or any issues or anything that anyone would like me to address.
So I think Kane from Connecticut also joined us, but only listening. Oh, there he is. And it's hey Kane, welcome. So Spencer, thanks Rick, first of all. And Spencer, you actually have, like, I know you got an employee manual and you have a outsourced HR firm that you've been working with, right?
Yeah. And I was actually going to say, so it's been interesting because my dad, for kind of when I came in and started taking over for my dad, he was part of the generation of where HR and policies and rules caused more problems for him than it helped him. But luckily enough, one of my mentors and people that I learned from, and actually how I got connected with Wayne, was Tom Rubens, and he's very much a culture advocate. So luckily me and my sister have kind of been going down the road of really starting to put in some HR policies and not really look at HR as if it's a burden, but more look at it as a way to make things better, to improve our culture. And I didn't really know how this question would go, but from your perspective, Rick, and for companies that you work with, how do you make it so HR doesn't seem like a burden and it seems more like a way to improve your company?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that's asked often. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we've worked with over 2,000 businesses across the country. And, in many instances, one of their first concerns that we need to overcome is, well, we're a small business. We don't want to be corporate America, right? And the real goal of HR is to understand how it meshes with a business and what the culture is, right? So for instance, when companies have a culture of having a business coach or advisor like Wayne and being a part of a group like this, what it typically signifies to us is that that business leader values people, process, procedure, and when combined together, their potential. So part of HR's or our goal is to understand what the culture of the business is, what the leader is trying to achieve, and then ultimately to release the day-to-day HR pressure valves that may build as a result of that, rather than saying, well, this is what you need to do. We work with a lot of union construction companies all across the country. And as you can imagine, a union construction team speaks to each other very differently than an accounting or professional services type of firm, right? So part of that understanding is that the culture of the business has to be preserved, but more importantly, what has to be preserved is the legacy of that business owner, right? And how to insulate them from the day that something goes wrong within that culture, and so that their kids' inheritance or their, what they're going to do with this business doesn't go away. And I'll give you a very simple example. We trained last year over 22,000 employees on sexual harassment training using our learning management system. And we were doing a training at a union it wasn't union, it was just a construction shop. And at the break room where we were conducting the meeting, there was, nudie pinup girl posters, but that's part of that culture. So that has to be understood and dealt with, but not in a way to say we're going to, no one's ever going to tell a crass joke on the job or those sorts of things, but understand where it fits in and set the policies and procedures to make sure that those things are protected.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we work with fire departments, and a lot of our employees were either ex-firefighters or have been in the fire industry. and it's very much the same crude humor, and
Yes.
we're not really, when we hear the rules, it's how do you get around the rules? It's not, how do we follow the rules? But since we did that, we do work with an HR company, and actually ended up saving us because we just came out with an employee handbook at the beginning of this year that we had a meeting with, and we had everybody sign. Just a couple months later, we had an employee who did something that was against that handbook, and we were able to give them a final written warning. But I know it just eliminated that gray area of, can we punish this employee? What they did, was it wrong? So it actually ended up saving us in this example, because we had written policies of how to proceed from there.
Yeah. We have a voluntary ambulance corps. They have about 60 people, very similar to and they have those same issues. People sitting in an ambulance all night, they're overnight, they're talking, man, blah, 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 blah. There's any kind of combination. So yeah, totally understand. So that's great that you have the policies and procedures to make sure that your business is protected. That's the nature, that's the exact intent of the things that we talked about. So that's great.
Which are the states that require the mandatory sexual harassment training?
I'm sorry, you froze there, Wayne, but
which states require mandatory sexual harassment training?
Can anyone hear me? Yeah. Oh, okay. So the states that require training are New York, California, Illinois, Delaware. Where am I? Let me just make sure. New York, Connecticut, California, New York, Maine, Delaware, and Illinois. Those are the 6. Connecticut, California, New York, Maine, Delaware, and Illinois. Additional states. So, if you remember back to the pandemic, just to use New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, they were almost operating in tandem, right? In what they were implementing. So there are bills in the House or in their houses, whatever, their state legislatures, where Connecticut, New Jersey, and a bunch of other states are trying to get similar types of bills passed. Additionally, DEI training at a national level, diversity, equality, inclusion training is being kicked around as kind of the next level of mandated annual training for employees. But those are not finalized yet.
Got it. Can you hear me now? Is it coming through okay?
Yeah.
I do think, so you mentioned earlier about employee issues, discipline, termination. Those are definitely the things that I, as a coach, get the most calls for. And I think they're probably the things that stress me out the most when I was in the seat back in a bigger company, is how to handle underperforming employees, do it the right way. But like just a week and a half ago, a client called and they had somebody who's a salaried employee, and they had high hopes for this person, and increasingly got frustrated with him and were ready to terminate the employee. But then when it's towards the end of all this, and that's what happens, you said a lot of times small businesses are quick to hire, slow to fire, as opposed to slow to hire, quick to fire. That's certainly true. But then when a business owner gets like, they're like, now I'm done with this person, and they haven't really documented it. So I take it that you provide best practices. That's part of the employee handbook or the company handbook.
So there's 2 sides of it. Like, so the first side of it is just take the human element. No one wants to do it, right? Because it sucks.
Totally.
Right? There's a human emotion to that. So that person hired them. They had high hopes, as you mentioned. Like, they had some sort of not only professional vested interest, but they emotionally invested in them at some level, right? So to break that, it feels painful. They may have talked to them in the first month and said, hey, you're doing great. We really love having you here. Now it's 6 months later, they go, this person is not doing great anymore, right? So there's a bunch of sides to this thing, right? So, and the first is, just think of the employee life cycle as we touched on high level. Do you have a job description that really represents the job, right? What is that person being judged upon, right? Do they know that when they come in, right? So when they know that, that's going to help them with the culture, right? The employee policy that says, hey, if you're not doing well, here are the steps this company is going to take, right? So again, you know that it's upfront, we're kind of big adults and all that kind of, and then the third side is, well, if it's time to go, this is how the company is going to decide, and this is how we're going to do it. So from an emotional standpoint, right, it takes the business owners, gee, I loved Joe 2 years ago, but boy, he's gone off the deep end, I got to get rid of him, right? So it takes that away. Secondarily, Joe knows it, right? So it's not me firing Joe. Joe, this is our policy, and this is where you fall down. And we've talked about it. So from the perspective of what we do for our clients, is in most cases we're doing that with them in advance, so that should that time come, it becomes an easy thing, and we'll execute it for them if they want us to. That's not a problem. But a lot of times, what we get is an employee that says, "Look." An employer that says, you know what, I built this business, it's been 15 years, and I don't even want to go into the office anymore because I hate them all, right? And why do they hate them all? Because everyone's just going from their own playbook, right? And think about the sadness of that. I started this thing, it's my baby, and I can't even go. So part of HR's job in all of this process, the employee life cycle, is to create a common playbook and make sure that the quarterback, the center, the wide receiver, and the two tackles and everyone else are all running the playbook at the same time from the same position, rather than what most small business owners are doing. They're doing their own thing. The quarterback's, calling audibles, and the linemen haven't heard, right? So all of that stuff, it's this life cycle thing that, when done properly and taken in concert, it's like the difference of listening to one violin or an entire orchestra that's working together. And that's kind of how it works.
Great. Kane, do you have any pressing HR questions since we have Rick today? And Kane's in Connecticut.
Oh, nice.
So I just learned I got.
I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yeah, once or twice. So I guess I just learned that I'm supposed to be mandatorily training our employees on sexual harassment.
Yeah.
So there's a good takeaway from today. I don't have any pressing HR issues. We are having the conversation here about updating our company handbook and how to handle the a marijuana policy, because now that that's legal here in Connecticut, we have to address it. I think the immediate way that we're thinking about it is like very similar to an alcohol policy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And depending on your industry, can you even test now so we do a lot of background check. Can you even test for it now, and all that sort of things? And what I would say is along those lines, if I can give some free advice, is, and this is for anything, consistency is the key, right? So a lot of times, small business owners were running and gunning, and every day is a different day, right? So today I hire someone, and we just took on 3 new clients, and I got to go take them to lunch, and we're going on the fun thing, right? All that stuff. They're going to do all the good things. So I don't follow the policy and procedure that day, and I don't get Johnny drug tested. Now 2 weeks later, I got kind of a more quiet day. We're bringing on Joey, and I'm like, oh, we got to get Joey drug tested before we bring him on. Now all of a sudden, I just created a discriminatory act, and that happens every day. And I think, Kane, and this is not a tisk, because this is exactly why we're in business. What you just said about Connecticut harassment training policies, right? And we talked a little bit earlier. I'm not sure if you were on the phone, but there are minefields being created every day from both federal and state agencies and governments, and in some instances, the local governments, the cities, et cetera, counties. they're creating these minefields for business owners, and they don't even know that they're in the minefield, right? And that's par for the course, and it's almost like designed that way, right? And so from a perspective of, and I'm not picking on any business that has a mandatory state, there's no fines or penalties if you don't do the training. No one's coming and saying, let me see your papers, right? No one's doing that. But what does happen, if there, God forbid, is ever a problem, and the first thing they're all going to ask for is, show me your handbook, show me your performance reviews, show me your job descriptions, and show me your sexual harassment training every year, and your model policy that you have in your handbook about sexual harassment training. And the owner goes, I don't know. Well, then what that agency or that government's going to do is they're going to look at that business and say, then you have no leniency, and ignorance is not an excuse. So, and that's not your fault. And this is, more businesses than not. I've only touched 2,000 in the country. And so, more businesses than not don't know these things. And more businesses than not say, well, I've never had a problem, so why should I worry? And my answer is the old car insurance. Well, I haven't had a car accident in a couple of years, knock on wood, thank God. So maybe I should cancel my car insurance. And that's how the government is approaching this stuff. And that's what they're doing to business owners. So to fix the problem in arrears could be, tens, hundreds, thousands of dollars versus, like anything, an ounce of prevention is worth, 5 pounds of reaction or whatever. So we've trained over 22,000 employees last year just on sexual harassment training alone. So someone should do your training for you. Someone should look at your model policies and make sure that they're state compliant.
Cool. Thanks.
Well, and another thing, in a world where there has been a shift, and we would benefit by having a diverse workforce. I believe that companies that aren't diverse, cultural diversity, male, female, almost all will benefit by having that diversity, and the old school, like having pin up posters or magazine cutouts. I don't think that leads to the most effective workplace in almost any industry. It's just, these are just things that when I grew up, boys will be boys and all that kind of thing. But I don't think that's best case scenario going forward. So even though sometimes employees make fun of some of those things, I think it does result in a safer culture, better workplace, more long-term durability of the company.
I'll give you an example. So we have a client in Rochester, and what they do is they do, high-end office furniture, for big companies like, Bausch & Lomb and Paychex and those kinds of companies, all those Rochester big companies, Kodak, that used to be, all those companies that used to be really big. And so they would, do these $10 million jobs for these kinds of companies, big contracts all over the country, their offices. And they had 2 guys in a truck, and they had different backgrounds. And the one was kind of the supervisor and was, telling those jokes. Well, we had to fire that guy, right? So it was the right thing to do. But now that company had no training. They didn't follow any of those things, and they were vulnerable, right? Not only from the biggest vulnerability was, to your point, Wayne, that was not the culture that the owner was intending to have. So we wanted that fixed, right? But then they were at risk, because if their client had found out that there was some sort of problem, that they could have pulled their contract and ruined their entire business, right? And then the third thing is, if you don't fix it, address it, then the other employees think that someone's condoning it. So it has this big spiraling effect, all this stuff. And all of it goes back to just really good, sound policies and procedures. What will happen if there's a problem? What should the employee expect who's in trouble? What should the employee expect who is hurt by these things? And how is everyone going to react in a consistent manner to protect, you know, the employees in a safe place and all those kinds of things. But also, if I own a business, well, I own a business, as we all own a business, and I don't want anything, this is my children's legacy. This is their inheritance, right? I don't want to have that risk on my shoulder. Just like having an insurance policy, I want to transfer that risk to someone else. And that's what all this stuff is. It's a transference of risk.
Spencer, any other questions?
No, thanks for your time, Rick. I think you explained everything really well. And it's funny because your HR is like, it gets the rap of you guys are the ones that's the burden, but really you're the one who's protecting everybody from the burden.
Yeah, like anything, and you know, it's how it's done, right? So we're small business. I'm a small business owner. I operate it. My team is hired to operate. So my team just quickly is made up of 14 HR folks, all PHRs, SPHRs, which are certifications, almost all of them masters in HR, and several of them doctorates in HR. And all of them have run, from a minimum of experience, have run a small business from an HR perspective for a minimum of 5 years before they become team members of ours. So understanding how a small business owner thinks and acts, and it's different than being professionally managed from some CEO from, you know, Harvard or Yale, who was brought into a publicly traded company that's been running for 100 years with a very different culture. So it's important to have team members and all things, right? All things that just understand what small business is and how it operates.
Spencer, so you have that outside firm you're working with, you have an employee handbook now. Do you have a person on staff who is a designated HR specialist or anything like that?
No.
So your sister handles a lot of things, or you, or whoever, or?
It's a mix between me and her. So we have 90-day check-ins where we do performance evaluations, salary evaluations, and then check-ins with them, which I handle. And then for signing for HR policies, 401k, and that type of stuff, they go to Shelby. And then if they have specific questions, they then work with our HR company. So it's kind of split between me and Shelby and them.
And Kane, do you have a HR person on staff?
We don't. I would say that what happens here is it's a combination of me and Chuck and, you know, our bookkeeper who organizes everything having to do with paperwork. But Chuck and I are the go-tos on policy and procedure.
Who makes sure all the like posters are in the lunchroom with minimum wage and all the disclosures and all that kind of thing?
I guess our bookkeeper is the one who gets them ordered every year because they have to be up to date. So they have to be renewed every year. She orders them, and then like Joe Ellen and Michael were the ones that posted them in their buildings because we have the two separate buildings. So everything's done in duplicate with regards to those.
And how many employees, Kane, right now?
70.
Wow.
So Rick, and I wanted to ask that because Kane and Spencer are representative of our community and the people that will watch this. And what I want to understand is, because I think that's common, most of my clients don't have a full-time person who's a member of SHRM or anything like that. The company I come from, we had about 70 employees, kind of similar to Kane. And we had somebody who was actually my dad's assistant. My dad was the founder, and his person who was his executive assistant. She was very competent, very smart. She had an associate's degree in business management or something. And she got very interested in the HR side of things. And our commercial insurance provider had a person who specialized in providing employee handbooks and was on call if we ever had any questions. Plus, you cobble this together, your commercial insurance provider, the accountant, whatever. But this particular person, Kathy, got very interested in HR, went to college, got her degree, And then, and we were growing at that same time. And her office was right next door to mine. So I had to leave sometimes because people would go in there with these issues and things. And it was dress code, and it was so-and-so did this and they're not coming in, but we are.
Their
And
perfume is the worst.
yeah, but she really helped me with like terminations, the discipline policy. And the other thing we got into is I had an employee that we hired in a sales role, and then he kind of disappeared, and he was in jail actually, and didn't tell us about his federal conviction that he was like on borrowed time before they threw him in a slammer. And at that point, we started doing mandatory background checks because we would have caught this, that he was had committed all this fraud and everything. And then we had some people that showed up on background checks with an assault charge in one case, I remember, and some other guy who had sold a bunch of mobile homes in the South fraudulently. He was a great salesperson apparently, but had done it in the wrong way. And then that same guy had fraudulently sold these mobile homes, but also had been all over the news because he actually opened like a strip club and had a huge light that was shining in the, like I read all this stuff. Like you can't help but read this stuff when you sort of come up with all these scenarios. Yeah. And so we had to tell him that he was pending the results of the background check. He had been, I had to learn the proper terminology. Like, we're offering this job to you on a contingent basis pending the results of your background check. But then the background check comes in, and I couldn't reference the whole thing about having a strip club and a light, even though I didn't want to hire him for those reasons because he seemed like not a culture fit. However, but based on the fraudulent mobile home, he did. But it was stuff like that we got into. Now, yeah. So what I want to know is how do people work with you? You mentioned having an HR audit or a risk assessment first, which would then likely lead to or could lead to an engagement. It's important to the business builders, I'm almost done, promise, for how you work with people and for them to be able to see themselves in your process. And there's probably other companies. You're the best, of course, because you're here presenting to us, but there's probably other companies that do this too. How would they get started?
You're the first person that's told me that today, so I'm very thankful.
You're welcome.
Now, all good. Now, 100%. And that, what you just described is what we all deal with every day, right? I'm bringing on 2 more team members. I got one starting tomorrow and one on May 17th. So we all deal with this stuff, right? It's not, it's not uncommon, but the process and the procedure has to be developed out because it's the best way to catch these things. It's the best way to prevent them. And if they sneak through the 5-hole, it's the best way to remedy that. You got to remedy them. So what we do is we recommend that every business owner take an HR risk assessment. It's $299, right? And what this gives them is a report that looks something like this. It's about a 6-page report. It's very simple to do. It's just a lot of questions that the average business owner can answer in about 15 minutes, and it gives them immediate feedback. But more importantly, it gives them a score, an actual score of where they are in from a high risk perspective, moderate risks, and then, or are you an all-star? Are you doing everything right? So this allows the business owner at a very high level, just with this piece right up here, forget reading all this. That's where we would help them interpret it and execute for them. But just helps them see, like, okay, I am at a high risk, I'm not at risk, or I'm really, good, whatever it might be. So we've done hundreds of these things. And literally the average score, and the reason I use this fake report is I set it up this way, the average score is 25 out of 100 for most business owners. And what I say to every business owner is, if you came home when you were 15 with a 25 on your math or science test, would your parents be pleased and proud? Would you be pleased and proud? And most say no, of course. But that's where we are in our business from this perspective. But at least this gives them an understanding of that they're at least in a minefield, right? Whether they try to fix it or not, who fixes it for them, that's a different story. But understanding that they're probably in a minefield, this is a good first step. And it's easy, it's non-invasive, and it gets those juices flowing. It gets us understanding what's going on with the business, so then we can dive down on some of the things that we talked about in the presentation: wage and hour, compliance, I'll highlight there, right? Discrimination and harassment, right? These are the things we talked about. Benefits, we talked about, and then discipline and termination, right? So it kind of hits those high levels to say, okay, I feel like I'm all right, but I don't know, or I have no idea, or I think I'm really good. So this is a good, inexpensive, high value, very little time consumption system to get people to see visually, just at a high level, where am I?
Yeah.
So that would be the first step that I would recommend most business owners take.
And if somebody doesn't have a full-time HR person,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like what our scenario is, a couple people handle it
Yeah.
most of the time, maybe not aware of all these laws that are coming down. What does it look like to get started working with you and your team? How many hours, how ballpark, how much money, rather than hiring somebody?
Typically for a company of, so our average client is like 50 employees to 200. That's the meat of our bell curve of the 2,000 that we've worked with, right? Typically those companies, when HR is built properly, and that's our job, right? It should take no more than 10 to 20 hours a month for HR to run a business of that size, right? So from our perspective, call it somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500 a month is, and probably more close to the $1,500 for most of those businesses. Because the goal is to use our knowledge to make it efficient, not to just create more work, right? So from that perspective, they get a high-level team, and we become their HR department. We handle everything under the HR umbrella, as long as it's not illegal, unethical, or immoral. So with that said, we have three kinds of clients. We have someone that has no HR, right? Says, gee, I need something, but I don't know who to go hire. I want a company to handle this, right? So we'll handle everything. We have the second kind of company that is, I think, kind of one of them was, I forget which company was describing, which, one owner handles this, the bookkeeper's handling that, and so on and so forth. In those businesses, the person where all the burden falls will either work alongside them or take it over from them, which they're usually very happy for, because that person knows, not the owner so much, but the people underneath, who say, if there's a problem, someone's going to get their finger pointed, and it's probably going to be me. And I know the owner is not going to fire themselves. So my job's on the line. So they love us. The third bucket are companies that have a truly developed out HR person or team, and they need specific expertise or hands for specific projects. So we kind of run the gamut of those three areas, of those three types of companies. And all three our model, fits right into.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Kane, do you have any final questions?
I don't have anything
Well,
asked
Wayne,
right now.
I thank you for having me. If I could be a resource to you or any of the team members, I'm happy to do so. We have the ability to answer any questions through email with a written response, research response called our Ask Live service. So whatever you need, just let us know, and we can certainly help out.
Great. And I think, I've been sharing a couple of those YouTube videos that you produce with like kind of timely hot topics and thought-provoking questions. So those are helpful. So we appreciate you coming today and for all those things you share out on the internet.
Cool. Thanks, Kane. It was very nice meeting you. And
Nice meeting you, Rick.
guys. And if there's anything I can do, just give a shout.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay.
Rick.